Welcome to Vishal and Company, where Equity Guru's own Vishal Tura, Taku Ndachena, Colin Botrell, and Maddie Grace examine the week's financial events in real terms, bringing the esoteric blur of public market activity into sharp focus. So come in, sit down, put your feet up, and enjoy.
Maybe getting back into cash, wait for a bit of a pullback before we continue higher. The other news is people fearing that the election result is actually not really determined yet. And the way we saw that was the fear index here, the volatility index. Um, I know this candle might not look too significant to you guys right now, but in the last 15 minutes of that day, we were red like this. So just imagine the candle was red like that. It looked like volatility was disappearing. But then all of a sudden, in the last few minutes of trading, they ended up making a green candle close, right? Indicating that there's still some fear, still some volatility. Don't know what that's going to come from, right? So maybe there's something coming down the pipeline. And that's what we actually over on our Discord channel and our trading room with a few of the traders, we've been considering that and watching the VIX, also with the fact that the markets cannot actually get back above previous highs here. As you can see here, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and now this is today, just a range. So basically, price is contained within a top resistance level or a price ceiling, and a bottom zone here, which is price support, right? Or price floor. And nothing's really happening. So it's just been one of those weeks. It's really only the Nasdaq that has seen a move a bit, a bit lower before popping up higher. But as you can see here, even on the Dow Jones, we are just ranging, and even on the Russell 2000, we are just ranging. So the way I'm playing the markets, and the way most people are going to be playing the markets now, we're just waiting now for a break, right? That's all we're waiting for. Either price will break above our resistance here, which means price can move higher, or we do the opposite and we wait for a breakdown to see price move lower. So it's now just a game of patience. It's just a waiting game. There are people who like to play ranges, right? So what they'll do is they'll sell here, hoping for price to bounce back down, and then they'll take their profits here, and then they'll buy, hoping for price to continue up higher, and they'll keep repeating that. So as you can see, that would have been profitable, right, this week. But generally, ranges do break, right? We are just going to be waiting to see which side wins. Is it going to be the Bulls or the Bears? And a lot of that, I think, has to do with maybe that volatility there, right? So that's two things that we're keeping an eye out on. As you can see, gold actually got smashed too on that day of the vaccine news, right? Big drop here on gold. What was that? A nearly 5% move down. But I mean, look at that size of the candle, right? It took out gains that were made in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days worth of gains taken out in one trading day. And because of that, gold is now back at its support zone or price floor zone here. And we're just waiting to see if we do break below that. A lot of you guys know who follow my market moment work. I was saying that I think we do see that break, which would take gold lower. I was aiming actually at 1800, but now looking at the daily chart, maybe we actually go down to 1745. The exact same thing with silver as well, although silver didn't get smashed as much as gold. And again, that came out on the day of that vaccine news. So something to watch for there. As you can see,
sorry to interrupt. Could you just explain why the news of the vaccine would affect gold in that way?
Yeah. So, a lot of people have been looking at gold as like it's a safe haven, right? So when things are uncertain, when there's some fear, you tend to buy gold. That's not really happening, all the time now because I think of what the dollar's been doing. But that's the thinking, right? With a COVID vaccine coming, it does lessen the fear, which means you don't really want to hold gold. There are some people who would disagree with me, though, and those are the gold bugs who do think that gold is actually just manipulated because they can't allow that price to go higher. But to answer your question, let's take a look at what the dollar did, and the dollar actually did bounce, right? So people forget when we're looking at gold, it is versus the U.S. dollar, right? That's generally the one that most traders look at. Although, yes, you can look at it versus the Canadian dollar and all that kind of stuff too. But as you can see, even gold versus the Canadian dollar dropped. So this whole idea of, the risk off sentiment, right? Maybe money is not running into safety, which is generally seen as gold. And that's primarily why gold fell. But I guess that's a good segue here to the dollar, because I remember last week we were talking about a weaker dollar versus a stronger dollar. And we talked about this. TK, have you been keeping your eyes on the dollar?
I haven't been watching it of late.
Okay. Well, I mean, you remember we talked about this 2012 trend line here and this major support zone here. And as you can see, the dollar did actually initially get a bounce off of that zone. And now we're seeing a bit of a sell-off. But I think this chart is probably the most important chart to watch for, I think, if you're into markets and investing for the future, because what the dollar does here will impact, I think, not only gold and silver, but will impact oil and equity markets. But the one thing that a strong dollar is not really impacting is Bitcoin. Bitcoin continues to rise, which is pretty crazy. I know we can give our thoughts about why Bitcoin's doing this, but look at this, folks. I mean, this is the resistance level that we've been talking about on this show here, around 16,000, and it does look like we might actually get a break and close above that maybe even by the end of today, which would mean Bitcoin's going back up to its previous all-time highs, just under 20K there. So what a rise there in the cryptocurrency there. And also Ethereum is also looking to follow suit here. A few trader friends that I know have actually stopped trading stocks because there's apparently a lot of action in the altcoin markets. So just similar to the markets we had in 2018, apparently that's how the altcoins are. There's a lot of big movers there. Any of you guys follow the altcoins by any chance?
I don't follow any of the altcoins at all, but it kind of seems like they're just like very similar to the early cannabis days. They all kind of seem to move in sync.
Yep, exactly. So what I'm going to be watching for, I think Bitcoin's doing its own thing here. People like Stanley Druckenmiller actually came out, not like recommending people to buy Bitcoin, but he was a bit more open to the idea of buying Bitcoin. So there is this news now or theory that a lot of Wall Street is in Bitcoin and they might be setting up for a huge pump and dump, but we'll have to wait and see. Ethereum, I like to follow just because I think a lot of the altcoins actually follow the Ethereum movement, whereas Bitcoin does its own thing. So with this rise here in Bitcoin, in Ethereum, I think we might see some action here in, for example, in say a Ripple coin here, which is forming a head and shoulder pattern here, and also something like Stellar, which is also seems to be forming a bottoming pattern here. But that's really it for the equity markets in general. As I said, sort of been a boring week. We have just been ranging, and now we just have to look at other assets such as, like I said, the US dollar, the volatility index, and I forgot to cover the bond market, but we'll just look at that very quickly here. This is the 10-year yield, and I want to show you this chart. Seemed like we had a breakout here in bonds. Again, if the bond yield is going up, it means that money is leaving the safety of bonds and is either likely going into stock market, right? Just because that's the asset allocation model that a lot of money managers are taught. You have an asset allocation between stocks and bonds. But I mean, that money could just remain in cash, or it could also buy commodities, or maybe even Bitcoin, I guess, if it wanted to, right? But this red candle here, this breakdown, generally what we see, on retest is we see price breakout, come back before continuing higher. And that breakdown there is not the nicest. It's something that could be putting pressure on the equity markets because this is indicating fear once again. But there is still that uptrend here. So a lot of things to look at here. And, sometimes you get these weeks, right, or days in a trading week where nothing really happens. And unfortunately, that's what we have this week. We're just going to be waiting for that break above or that break lower. And that's really all we can do. In terms of the IPO here, I want to share this article with you guys. So a lot of us know Snowflake was IPO'd, Palantir was IPO'd, BigCommerce was IPO'd. We're hearing that Playboy is actually going to be doing an IPO again.
Sorry, Vishal, I'm just going to interrupt you quick again. One of our viewers just asked if the price of gold is being manipulated. Just want to answer her there.
Okay. So that's we do.
Oh,
know
sorry, I'm wrong. They said it was being manipulated.
It was being manipulated. Okay. I mean that's that's what a lot of people claim, right? With JP Morgan and all that kind of stuff. And the way I look at that is I do put some some strength in that claim, because if you're a central bank or if you're a banker in general, you really don't want money to flow into gold, right? You don't want money to jump into gold, because money going into gold is actually not productive, right? It does indicate that maybe people are afraid of things, which would mean money would be leaving stocks to maybe go into risk off assets such as gold, maybe into bonds, maybe even to the US dollar. So there's a lot of people, like a Jim Rickards, who mentions that gold has to be kept suppressed, because if it does keep going higher, it's going to start taking money away from actually productive investments and productive assets into something that is, it's really not productive, right? Putting money into gold is, as I said, it's that a way to run into safety, right? When the picture or the image of the gold bug is someone who, believes that things are going to go haywire, going to go crazy. We're going to see like the end of the world. Maybe we're going to be transacting with gold and silver. But I do believe that there is a currency crisis coming, right? I have talked about why that dollar being weak is bad for, say, Canada or for England or for Europe, especially because a weaker dollar means that the euro and the Canadian loonie is going to be going higher, right? They're going to be getting stronger. So expect those banks, those central banks, to do something to weaken their currency, especially Europe, right? Europe wants a weaker euro because they want to be able to export more products to try to boost their economy. And everyone wants to do that because with COVID, there's really no strong Western economy anywhere in the world, right? So I do believe in that situation, in that currency war situation, you will be seeing money run into things such as gold, silver, and perhaps even Bitcoin. That is generally Ray Dalio's sort of theme, that there is like gold is not actually a commodity, but it's actually the best currency that you can own and buy. And if you're only into loonies, or if you're only into US dollars or euros, you should be getting out of those fiat currencies and be, buying gold, right? Which is the best currency. As someone who studies, classical economics, we tend to look at gold as a currency. So, last year when we saw gold rising up against all these different currencies, against the euro, against the pound, against the yen, it was making all-time record highs against all those other currencies except the US dollar. That was telling us that inflation was coming, right? It was telling us that central banks of those countries are going to be doing something that are going to kill their currencies, right? Little did we know that COVID would come, but what gold was doing against those currencies was foreshadowing or foretelling us, again, this maybe even this environment of imperfect information, right? We knew something was coming. We just really didn't know what it was. But yeah, the big talk is, of course, JP Morgan, who apparently has like the largest, not sure about gold, but the largest silver short, right? That's, I know what's his name, Keith Neumeyer, I believe is even trying to sue JP Morgan and some of the banks for that manipulation. And we've just heard news, right, about banks being fined for manipulating gold and silver. Little smack on the wrist, not a huge fine, but that's there. So, personally, like I said, I do believe that there is manipulation, but I look at it more as, banks do not want people in gold and silver because it takes money away from much more productive assets. But that's always going to continue. I know it's a hot topic, but just continuing here. We just got news here. DoorDash, Roblox, Wish, and AirBnB all are expected to go public before the end of the year. And I believe they are all filing their IPO prospectuses next week, actually. So we might be seeing this very quickly. And I just want to ask you guys, what are your thoughts on this? TK, what do you think is going on here, man?
I think it's a sign of where the bull market is. It's the sentiment is still people have interest in buying new equities, no matter what situation we're in. Mm-hmm. And yeah, especially some of these, because the prediction was Airbnb was going to be struggling, etc. But they still have interest.
Yep.
So it's interesting to see that they're actually still going through with their IPO or in their last few stages before the IPO.
Just a question. Do you think that these companies are IPOing because they believe that this is maybe the last time they'll be able to get things out with this type of equity market, hitting record highs? Like, is this the best time to do it? Or, is this something about maybe just desperately trying to raise some cash to survive?
Joe, it's so funny. This is not a person we should quote all the time, but Elon Musk's mantra is, raise capital when you can, not when you need it.
Yep.
And this is just an example of it. They probably need it and they can at the same time.
Yep.
But we're not too sure what's going to be happening in the next 2-3 years, especially because of COVID, the US election, or the new president who came in. We're not too sure if it's going to be as easy for companies to IPO, and what kind of thirst investors have for new stocks when people are going into the Coca-Colas for the dividend instead of the capital gain and that kind of stuff. So it makes sense that a lot of them are trying to bank in on the bull market that's going on right now.
Yeah, I'm just showing you guys some of the charts here, the IPOs. It was only Palantir, which looked pretty decent. But before I end here and pass it on, Maddie and Colin, you have one choice to buy one of these stocks here: DoorDash, Roblox, Wish, or AirBnB. Which one are you going to buy?
I'm going DoorDash.
Yeah,
That'd be DoorDash.
DoorDash.
I was
COVID.
going to say the same. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the one that a lot of people are going to be watching for. Like this one seems like it's has a pretty, decent business, right? And I do believe their prospect did show that they did make profit, good revenues, obviously likely due to COVID. So this is the one that I think we'll all be watching.
Airbnb will be an interesting one too, though.
Yeah.
Very much be. Which one are you watching, Michelle?
I would be getting DoorDash. Like I think for a long-term hold, I actually do like Palantir. So Palantir, was IPO'd just a few weeks back. I think that's a really nice one. But I think DoorDash is going to be also one of these ones to hold for a quite long time. Airbnb, I think, could be up there too, because I do believe maybe in 10 years' time, they'll still be around, right? So that'll be an interesting one. But again, a lot of debate. It's really about COVID, right? Once COVID disappears and once we beat it, how's Airbnb's business going to bounce back? And I think that's why I do believe that they'll probably be around, in the next 10 years from now. So that would mean an add in a long-term portfolio.
Awesome. I am just going to pass it over to Asan really quick. He's just going to talk about some updates in biotech.
How's everyone doing?
Good, dude.
Yeah.
Hope you're all wearing your pants.
Yep, for sure.
So what does everyone think of the new vaccine? Are you guys going to take it?
Yes.
You mean the microchip?
The microchip.
Yeah,
you know
we
what?
can take
Once all the politicians take it, then I'll take it.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Once all the politicians do it, and then I'll take it.
You guys are so freaking pessimistic.
Well, the thing is with a vaccine, one of the reasons it takes so long is usually once you start the actual trial phase, then you have to wait for a year or so to see if there's any lingering side effects. So that's the one thing they're not going to be able to do when you expedite a vaccination, the vaccine, and making it available right away.
So it's too quick. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it took a toll on the Canadian life sciences, especially some of these stocks that we've talked about, some of these companies that got notoriety during this COVID phase.
Yep.
I think IPA took a big hit. Colin, you looked at them. Do you know a couple other ones that took a big hit? I think Sona took a big hit.
Sona took a big hit. Pretty much anything that wasn't Pfizer almost seemed to take a dip there for sure.
So
Well, take a look at Pfizer though. Like it did actually gap up, but it sold off on the news after.
yeah,
so
I think it shows the skepticism. So if you
Yeah.
want to bring in bring up IPA. And so
Immune presence.
this is the biggest beef I have with the Canadian markets, right? A lot of the time the investors don't actually understand what the company does. So, and in biotech, a lot of companies don't necessarily have the fundamentals of, revenue. So in order for you to get a good idea what you're investing in, you really have to understand the science behind it. And with IPA, for instance, so these guys are CRO, which stands for Contracted Research Organization. So there you go. So essentially, they do, and they specialize in antibodies. So a lot of the bigger companies, antibodies, do we know what they are, everyone?
Please inform us.
Yeah, you might have to go over it for Colin.
So antibodies are part of the body's defense system. So when an antigen, which is mostly likely a foreign entity or cell enters the body, antibodies sort of corral them and take them down. And they're the good thing with them is they're very specific, right? That's the thing. So over the last few years, what's happened is the life sciences sector has evolved. So a lot of the time, the drugs, I think that 8 of the top selling revenue makers in pharmaceuticals are biologics, which means they are sort of drugs that enhances body's own immune system. So like, for instance, antibody driven is an example of those. The good thing with them and why they become so popular is they're very specific. So if you take, a synthetic drug, there is, let's say, chemo is a synthetic thing, right? It's killing the tumor, but it's also stopping a certain process in the body, so you're going to have side effects. Whereas, let's say an antibody-driven drug, it's able to specifically attack that specific antigen, so you're not going to get harm to other systems of your body. So that's why they're so important. So these guys, being a CRO, they do the initial part of the research, the R&D for bigger companies. In particular, they do preclinical. So they are able to use animal models. They have Talem, which is one of the platforms they use, which is, I believe, AI driven, to come up with antibodies that are specific to different antigens. And the thing is, for instance, with their work with the COVID antigen, you guys have seen, everyone's seen the picture of COVID, right? The virus with the little spike proteins.
Yep.
Yeah.
So so the antibodies basically recognize those proteins. That's how it knows, and that's why it makes it so specific. But the thing is, and that's why the mutations, and they say there's different varieties of it, those proteins are not always the same. There's mutations happen that changes their shape. So they are the only company, for instance, that has in their treatment trial that they're doing, right, that they're coming up with, the antibodies, it's a cocktail. There's 3 different ones. So it's able to recognize 3 different proteins. So even in case if there's a bit of mutation occurring anyways, they're able to come up with it. So going back to Pfizer came up with the virus and why, IPA dropped, right? My beef is a lot of people didn't understand. First of all, IPA vaccination is part of them, but they're also coming up with testing, also treatment. And their treatment is almost unique. I don't think I've come across any other companies that use a 3 antibody cocktail. And again, it's not done. They're developing it. There's going to be trials. But the reality of it is what makes me so interested in them, why I like them so much, is not necessarily because of what they're doing with COVID. It's the fact that they were able to get, like, from the antigen when COVID came across, right, to be able to come up with 3 different verticals of combating it and making progress so quickly, right? If you, Vishal, do you want to pull up a company called Zymeworks? ZYME and then works.
Did we lose Vishal there?
Did we cut off there for a bit?
I don't see your screen anymore.
I still see him.
Still see? Okay. Maybe that's just on mine.
The screen we're not looking at. The
shared screen. The
shared screen went off, yeah.
Just tell him that his share screen is
yeah, just your share screen's off on Discord, I believe. Here we go. Do you want to, Vishal, pull up a company called Zymeworks?
That's spelled
ZYME works. So Zymeworks basically does a very similar thing in antibody research. Obviously, they're more advanced in the clinical trials, right? They do not just preclinical, and then they came up with their own platform that they license out. But IPA very much has the potential to be similar to Zymeworks early future. And
Okay.
Zymeworks is, what's their market cap?
I'll have to take a look. Well, they are traded though at $41 American.
Yeah. And actually, IPA and Zymeworks actually recently announced a partnership together.
Looks like they've got a $1.9 billion market cap according to
1.9
Google.
billion. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're also they're just in Vancouver as well. But that just gives you an example. We have and I'm working on a report right now. Companies like Midexis, which is TK helped me come up with a report, but hugely discounted, right? You're looking at a discount of what, 69%, 76%?
True. Yeah, it was pretty discounted. I actually do have a question for you, Hassan. Do you think most of the misunderstanding is on the institutional side, or retail investors like me who don't understand what's going on under the hood?
I don't think it's institutional, because the reality of it is when these companies uplist, i.e. Zymeworks, when they uplisted to the NYSE, right? When the more institutional investors get involved, that's when the valuation gets closer to where it should be. So, and that's what, the beef is with the Canadian markets and the retail investors is, they're not doing their due diligence, which, you don't blame them. It's hard, difficult concepts to understand, but the companies themselves also don't do a good job, right? One of the things at Equity Guru we've tried to do is every time we talk about a different company in life sciences, sort of provide comparables. So This is what they're doing. Okay, so this is their business model, right? But here's a comparable, so then they get an idea what the value is, because as I said, so many of these companies are not, you can't value them based on their fundamentals. Medexus you can, because they have incredible revenue, and they're undervalued. But IPA, reality is, they also have revenue and growing revenue. But the reality is their potential and what they're doing is so much more impressive. Like a company called 6 Wave Innovations, SIXW is the ticker, right? I look at where they're sitting right now, and I'm like, they're pretty much bottoming out. And talking to the CEO and the intricacies of their technology and the different verticals it can get used for is incredible, and it just requires someone to go and sit and understand it, right? And I think more and more these companies are learning how to tell their story a bit better. But it's just the retail investors in Canada are just so attached to mining and then cannabis, so it's hard to get them. And when they do come on, right, it's always like like a company like Sona, right? It was hyped up extremely. It was I personally would say it was overvalued at $14-16, right? For a company that there's no revenue and you're waiting for something. So when they do come on, you always get a rush, so a whole bunch of people making a whole bunch of money and then a whole bunch of them losing money. So that also doesn't help that credibility of the sector. But we're going to try our best to help people explain to people about this sector as best as we can and see what happens.
Hassan, we have a viewer, Jasmine, who suggests investing in syringe stock, not pharma, because they're going to need a lot of syringes regardless of who makes the vaccine. What do you think about that?
To be honest, I haven't looked at syringe stocks, so I would not be able to give you an educated guess. But pharma stocks I like pharma better. I know a bit better and I trust it a bit better. But that's interesting. I will go and look at syringe stocks, to be honest now.
I think like the syringe stuff would be sort of like, like your value play, right? Because they'll be making profits continuously, where like, a pharma stuff, you're banking on that the invention of something great, right? A product or whatever.
But I mean,
Um,
like, sorry, and I want to cut this short last point. But a company like Medexus, right? They're not even. There's no. It's low risk. There's no R&D being happening. They literally or value. They literally acquire licenses for already developed drugs, so their cost of operations is just your sales and marketing,
Okay.
right? So, if you want to go look at low risk plays, go look at farm. And I think the last article we wrote about value, one of the first ones, we talked about how Johnson & Johnson in 2014 or 15 ended up actually going towards that model because it's the most profitable model. Is you already find things that are established, drugs, and then you just buy their licensing rate, and you already have your sales and marketing established. We talked about 6 Waves, IPA, Medexus. This is getting too long, but Perimeter, one of my other favorite ones. People should look at it. I think this is one that there's a lot of potential in. It's a medical device, which is even more. PMED I like too. So Perimeter is pink, P-I-N-K.
I keep mixing those up.
Yeah, so
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's a medical device, which is a bit, even more complicated, especially with FDA. But people should do more look into it.
Just before we let you go, I'm pretty sure a lot of the viewers want to know, what would you estimate or what would you predict your target prices for Pink and PMED? I don't want to put you on the spot, I know, but if you were going to predict, a take profit zone, what would you be looking at?
So Perimeter is one that's pre-revenue. They're waiting. They're getting some. The trials are happening with their device, and once enough data is in, the commercialization of their device happens. I know that there was some analyst coverage. We looked at, the latest one was a very conservative one from Raymond James, and I think it was somewhere in the threes. But the previous one, there was, lows of 650 and highs of 13 something. Right?
Okay.
A good comparable I always tell people is look at Profound, another medical device clinic, right? They've been public for a few years longer. They're a bit slightly ahead of Perimeter as far as where they stand. I don't know what the stock. How much is there?
$24.
Yeah, so you guys kind of see what the potential for medical devices in the sector are. So
Okay. Awesome.
PMED, I will not give you a price target, but I know there was a lot of partnerships made, but the main thing is the revenue, the initial revenue, their financials didn't reflect any of that revenue, but also because that foundation was being laid. So I know that they just announced exciting news a couple of days ago. I think now eventually what people should look at is now the revenues coming in. And once the revenues come in, it's going to be, then it's something that I think will be a good trade for people to get involved in and take profits from.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to TK.
Awesome. I'm gonna just touch on the IPOs to end it off. Keep it short and sweet because we've kind of already touched on Airbnb. But I want to focus on China and a failed IPO there. Potentially the largest IPO, only ahead of Saudi Arabia or Aramco and WeWorks, I think, in that order. And the IPO didn't go through because of Jack Ma's relationship with the financial regulators, in essence, the government. And this was going to be the highest raised IPO out of of Hong Kong and Shanghai. And it's an interesting shift in where capital is going because most of the largest IPOs are in New York. It's traditionally been that way. That's where most of the investor appetite is. But this one is going to be in Shanghai, and Shanghai and Hong Kong. And the scuttlebutt right now is that the government is the one that personally put a halt on the IPO. Of course, they use regulation as a scapegoat. They want to go through the prospectuses to make sure that investors' money is not being stolen. But this Jack Ma, he's a serial entrepreneur. He's raised money before. He's a public figure. He's probably one of the biggest Chinese celebrities. He's not running away anytime soon. That's not to say he won't run away. It's just, it's more of they're trying to put these protective measures in that might not be the case. I This is speculation now, of course, but I feel it was a capital control issue that they're trying to block through. Ant Group, formerly Alipay and I'm forgetting the other company, but they merged together to make the Ant Group, was focused on financial technology, mostly. I think the close relationship would be PayPal, the closest comparison. It has close to 1.2 billion users, active users. It has one of the largest user bases or total addressable market because it's in mainland China, and it's one of those IPOs that you'd expect to eventually come out, but with a reduced valuation or something to keep control of Jack Ma's control over capital flows. And that's the biggest issue that the CCP has is how can we control these private businesses in a state-run economy. And a lot of people would say, "Oh, that's not true. He has a bigger company out there," but it's an obvious sign of control of trying to control that capital flow. China has a history of trying to manipulate is the wrong word, but manipulate capital flow in and out of the economy because they need to keep currency or assets in the economy to invest back into productive uses in China. And if money leaves and goes to the US or UK, Europe, etc., that money won't be reinvested back in China. And as we've seen, China has recovered fully from the pandemic. The economy is probably the only one that's booming at the moment. There was no reason other than capital control for the IPO not to go through. And it's an interesting time for this to happen because of the appetite that investors have of IPOs in the US. We're talking about the DoorDash and etc. on this side. It shows you that investors do have an appetite for it. The only controls that they're trying to put in place is that inflow and outflow of currency. And that goes into a whole deeper topic that we just don't have the time for today. But it's something to watch out for with the Chinese IPOs. And the big question now for American and Canadian investors is how were we going to get access to buying the stock? There are these fancy little securities that have been made for us. They go by ADRs, American Depository Receipts. They're basically an IOU from the bank that owns the securities of a foreign entity, and they give you the right to whatever rights the stock is giving you. And that was going to be one of the ways that Hong Kong was going to give those rights to American banks to sell the stock here in the US to raise more capital for Jack Ma. And just in that little letting go, it would have allowed foreign money into the economy that now China cannot control the inflows and outflows. And it's a $34 billion company, which does not seem like much, but that's a lot of money to be flowing in and out without supervision, quote unquote supervision. But it'll be nice to see the IPO come through and actually see the prospectus to kind of look through and see what the government was holding it for in the first place. And if the prospectus comes out before the end of the year and there's nothing wrong in their financials, I think that is an obvious red flag about how much control the Chinese government actually does have on private businesses. And I personally, I'm not a big fan of big government or over controlling government. I think governments are inefficient in what they do a lot of the time, and this is just one of those signs where a company is trying to grow, create jobs, create revenue into the economy, create taxes, but you're halting it from moving forward because you don't want to lose control over assets. But yeah, that's what I have to say about Jack Ma.
Awesome. I'm going to pass it to Colin to wrap us up.
Awesome. So yeah, I know we are super short on time, so I will keep mine quick. Vishal, if you want to bring up the chart for Green Thumb Industries, that's a cannabis company. I'm sticking with my same old cannabis theme here. So Green Thumb just reported a blowout Q3 earnings once again. So they're really strong looking kind of chart. They reported 157 million US dollars in quarterly revs. So that was a big one. Positive net income. We've got Curaleaf and Trulieve both coming out with earnings on Tuesday the 17th. Curaleaf is aftermarket. Trulieve is pre-market. Two of probably the most highly anticipated cannabis earnings. Again, a lot of these stocks are looking at all-time highs at this point, and rightfully so. Cresco Labs, probably the next most anticipated one, is again on November 18th on Wednesday. That one's pre-market, and kind of expecting a pretty similar theme. 9-figure earnings, really strong margins, possibly positive net income, especially for Trulieve. They've got a history of doing that. The U.S. just showing their absolute dominance over the large cap Canadian cos. You have Kronos up there, Vishal. It's looking really strong. Same with Canopy, WEED. And then some kind of a peripheral kind of legalization news. We just got a confirmation from the Israeli government that they should have recreational cannabis legal in the next 9 months. So that's IPOT Israkan is a client of ours over at EQUITY.GURU, and they've got a really nice bottoming pattern there. So with the Israeli news, they are one to watch. And yeah, so exciting times as per usual for the cannabis space, and I will leave it at that.
Hey, Colin, actually, it might be a little off topic, but I think it's a good way to end it off. Is how back in the 1950s or whenever it was, I obviously don't know my history. People used to smoke cigarettes even when they're pregnant and etc. And now we look back and we're like, how did we allow pregnant women to smoke cigarettes? What do you think is going to be the epiphany with cannabis? Not saying it's pregnant women are smoking it. It's just it's one of those things we haven't fully gone into because it's only recently coming up into commercial use. What do you think? Some of the long-term things, the long-term questions people are going to have about it?
That's a really good question, actually. I think there's a lot of discussion around how smoking cannabis affects sperm count. So with men, I think maybe there could be something along the lines down there where they say, maybe some of this like ADD, ADHD, autism kind of stuff is coming from people. From men smoking cannabis in the when they're trying to have kids. That's one thing I've seen online. So I think I would lean towards something to do with reproduction in men versus women, because I mean it's pretty common knowledge that women probably shouldn't consume anything like cigarettes or cannabis or alcohol, obviously when they've got a fetus inside of them, but not too many people think about the male side of things. And that. So yeah. What about you guys? Any guesses?
I don't think there's any effect. Squirrel!
It's amazing. On that brilliant note, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you learned something. There was a few takeaways. I know the show is a little bit longer, and we will be back same time next week for more market updates.